Thank you so much for tuning into TruthWorks this year.
We're taking a short break over the festive period, but we can't wait to be back with more great conversations in the new year.
So we thought we'd share with you one of our favorite episodes you might have missed.
Don't forget, if you've got a career confession, a guest suggestion, or a topic you want us to dive into, you can get in touch with us. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks.
First of all, I just want to ouch for the comp people because there are probably some comp people going, my feelings are hurt.
Yeah, well, we're sorry, comp people.
Yeah.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hello, and welcome to TruthWorks. I'm Patty McCord.
And I'm Jessica Neal. And today we have one of my most favorite people in the entire flippin' world, because it is a flippin' world. She is famous in her own right. I'm sure many of you know her. Her name is Vernā Myers. She's here. I met Vernā, I don't know how many years ago now, because it's all kind of a blur. But I was running HR for Netflix, and we were in a bit of a crisis. And Vernā had been consulting with us, and I called her up and I said, what do I even do? And she gave me the best advice, and I somehow convinced her to come work for me at Netflix. And she was our VP of Inclusion Strategy. And she was a partner to me and a mentor and an inspiration. And, you know, just to tell a little bit of your story too, and I'm sure I'm going to miss stuff because your story is amazing. But you grew up in Baltimore.
Yes, I did.
Went to Harvard Law School, was doing that whole thing, then became you started your own company around diversity, wrote multiple books, TED Talks, and then, you know, somehow I convinced you to sell your company and come work for me at Netflix.
Well, actually, what you did is say I could hold on to my company and then and also work for you. So that was brilliant on your part.
Yeah, I was like, don't worry about the company. Just come. It's fine. And then now you're off doing your own thing again outside of Netflix, and you have a podcast. And I'm sure you're writing more books, I imagine.
Yes.
And so, you know, what I wanted to focus on today in our conversation with you is, of course, how wonderful you are, but kind of get into the world of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. As we were just discussing before we started recording, there's lots of letters that we, you know, are adding to this whole thing. But letters aside, there's been some progress. Well, I guess a lot of progress.
Hey, you know, I'm butting in like I do.
Yeah.
What was your problem and what was her advice?
Well, I was, you know, I didn't know whether I wanted to get into all that, but I feel like we should. And so I'll go ahead and tell the story. We had an employee that we were in a situation where it was like, should we let this person go? Should we not? It was super, super sensitive. It was very broad in the organization in terms of people knowing. It was a senior person, and they had said some things that were inappropriate. And was this sort of a lesson where we can let him or her or they learn? Or is this like a thing that this is not an opportunity to learn? This is an opportunity to set an example.
Cross the line.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was not clear, you know, which one it was. And I called Vernā because she was consulting with us. And I don't know. I think I was in Japan
Yes, you were in Japan.
I was in Tokyo. It was maybe 3 a.m. Tokyo time. And I was on a very high floor in a hotel.
You know how Tokyo is.
Yeah. And it was snowing. I remember this because I could see this. It was snowing. And I was on the verge of tears and felt enormous pressure to do the right thing. And I called Vernā and I said, I need your help. And this is super sensitive. I don't even really want to tell you, but I'm gonna. And
Yes.
I told her the whole story.
Well, first of all, that you called me, it gave me a sense of you trusting my advice. And so I really wanted to do well by you, knowing what position you were in as the head of people. And all of the kind of backlash that might come one way or the other. So you don't want to get your client into trouble, you know. But one of the things I remember saying, and one of the things that I think is so important for every company, is to know its values. And if Netflix knows anything, it's its values. And I remember saying to you, well, this is really like legitimately a hard decision, but your values will lead you.
That is exactly what you said. And
you
did.
Said, thank you. You said, thank you. It was like, and the decision that was made gave me an enormous amount of faith that your values weren't just something that was written down somewhere, that, you know, that there were like parts of like, you know, a way to like make Netflix look good, or, you know, make some kind of fake idea. But it was like, oh no, these are real values that help exactly in this moment. That's when you need it, in that moment when things are hard.
Yeah, we have been talking about this so much in our other podcasts, and it's such a great way to weave it into our conversation today, which is like, there's your values and you put them on the paper and you write them down, and sometimes you make a t-shirt out of them. And then there's D&I or DNA and DNA, whatever. And those are two different HR programs that operate in parallel.
Yes.
And for me, you know, at the beginning of helping set up those values at Netflix, it was about, okay, if we're going to write this shit down, we better live it. Yeah. And so talk a little about how you've seen that weaving work and that weaving not work in organizations you've worked with.
Yeah. And I'll just, but before you answer, Vernā, I just want to say that in that advice moment too, I wanted to put Vernā in my pocket and carry her around with me everywhere. And I never wanted her to leave my side again. And somehow I convinced her not to.
You made it so.
Yeah,
you made it so. You made it so. And it was a great thing.
That's when you know you make a difference in an organization, when you never leave their pocket. But I digress.
Yeah. I mean, you know, one of the major values that Netflix has is courage. And it's almost the value you need to actually act on the other values. Mm-hmm. Because the decisions that you are making that are really hard, they really require amount of courage, because it's like anything else, like in your personal life. When you know you're the right thing to do, it doesn't mean that the right thing is going to mean there's no pain. Mm-hmm. There's just going to be pain. And it's sort of like, what kind of pain do we want? Do we want pain that's the pain that ultimately leads us to more light and more love and more connection and more authenticity and more trust? Or do we want the pain that causes us to go more deeply into distrust and disconnection and et cetera? And the pain pretty much feels the same.
Right. And avoidance.
For a minute. Right. For a minute. And like, if you avoid too much, that's the other thing in these organizations. If you avoid, it just gets uglier and larger. And in fact, we had gotten to a little bit of that point anyway, right? Because we couldn't make the decision quickly enough. But that's the thing that I think makes a huge difference, Patty. And Jessica, you can say this too, is when you exercise courage, it doesn't mean it's magical. It means that you're holding steadfast with the belief that it's going to put you on the right track and keep it and actually prevent you from falling off the right direction and road. And so when I saw that, I was like, "Ooh, I can I can get down with this company because they are exercising courage." And so when I see companies doing that, it doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean they're going to get everything right. It means they have what it takes to make the hard decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's just beautiful what you said. And it really is courage, right? Because these things are not obvious. They're hard and they are painful on all sides sometimes.
Yeah. And walk us through that even though you and I have just talked about how we hate the D&I and language, walk us through that using some of that kind of language and those kind of experiences, because I think I also work with a lot of different companies. And when they talk to me about diversity, they mean having a candidate who's a person of color in the interview loop.
Yeah.
So by the way, I am not mad with the letters or the words because it's just part of a movement.
That's
and
right.
The thing about the problem with the movement, and I know that the M word is actually a bad word too, just people don't want it to be seen like a political thing. When I say movement, I don't mean a political thing. I mean an evolution of understanding about what is necessary in order to build these kind of companies that we really want to be a part of, right? Or we think we're a part of, right? So it's one of these things where we started off, actually, this used to just be called like anti-discrimination.
Yeah,
remember?
Right.
And then it kind of went to like a thing where we're like celebrating differences, right? And you're like, oh, we got some costumes and some food. That's exciting.
And there were quotas. Remember that was a word that was used back then, right? Well, have we met our quota? If we did, check. Ring.
Yes, exactly. And then, we started recognizing, and then went to go to diversity, and diversity is like a really, really great word. It's just that any of these words start to wear out and then people want to use them to go against the concept. So all diversity means is, hey, we're not all the same.
Right.
And isn't that glorious? And isn't that going to help us stay innovative and creative? And whose points of view do we not have? And what perspectives are we missing? And all of that. And that's all it means. It means that monocultural or everybody thinking the same way, groupthink is going to be a problem ultimately for any company that's trying to get into the future and actually succeed. So, so it's a great word. And yet it has now kind of fallen on this check the box kind of mentality. So then we went to inclusion, which I was very much part of, like, yes, because not only do we need the difference, but we need people of difference to feel like they are included. And then the word belonging started to come because, people were like, yeah, folks are feeling including, but on what terms are they having to be included? Like, do they have to actually emulate the folks who are already there and try to act like them? Do women, I used to say all the time to some of my clients, I'm like, you guys, you really want women, really? Because it seems like you want women who are most like the men you already have, right? So you're like looking for this thin slice of woman, right? And I'm not mad at it because there are women who are, authentically more like that.
Yeah, I think Patty and I talked about that the other day. It's like we did things like the guys did because that's how
that's what was expected.
Yeah.
Jessica literally, we were talking about like what things would you do, tell your younger self what you do differently. And
yes.
I was saying, because been around for so long. I mean, I used to coach women, and Jessica said she does remember me saying to her, "Look, Jessica, nut up."
Ooh, ouch.
Like, get you need to get tougher and stronger and,
get a bigger pair, Jessica. But and even though Patty said that, I didn't care at the time and it worked. I did get a bigger pair and I got promoted and I got heard and I, made an impact.
Well, that's the thing, though, I think is different is that we've got these different generations.
Right.
And they're looking at the clock and they're like, oh, come on now. We're still doing this.
Yes.
We're still talking this way. We're still having these expectations. So I think that's the equity piece is like a new idea, which is that we can't treat difference the same and expect that people are, we've got to actually figure out where the inequality is, and then do
Yep.
something significant to actually bridge
Yep.
that different, so a lot of the wording is our understanding and evolution of what is necessary. And now the word justice is being used, right? So, but what I do love is that some companies have recognized, and this is what we were talking about before, Patty, that this is, interpersonal is important. Everybody got to be nice and people got to be respectful and all that. But there are also like these built-in systems and practices that we never even noticed were skewed towards a certain group of people. And so how do you unskew them? It's hard.
Yeah. And it's like every other thing. I mean, this is my biggest message when I talk to people. It's not one thing, it's everything. Like you're just now talking about compensation. Back in the day when I was doing a lot of public speaking, right after I wrote my book, I did Jessica won't believe this, but I did a conference of 5,000 comp people. Like, Jess, you can't even imagine me being in the same room with 5,000.
No,
seriously.
They must have paid you a lot.
They did. And it was in New York and I had a friend there. So I'm in this great conference room and I walk up on stage and I said, look, the doors are closed. It's just us. Relatively speaking, I'm one of you. So go home, write some checks, fix equal pay. For God's sake, you're the comp people. Like,
right?
It's not brain surgery. Make a list. Average male pay, average female pay, by job title. If it's lower, write them a check. Make it. It's like, this is not brain surgery. Just fix it.
Right. And that didn't happen. In many cases,
they're like, oh, I can't do that. Can't do that.
Because here we get trapped also by this like false idea of meritocracy, right? So we're like, but is that fair?
Yeah, right.
Would that be fair? And you're like, well, okay, we've got this long-term problem that seems deeply embedded in everything we do.
And what everybody else does.
Right.
Yes.
Why don't we just do it and then see? Right.
Well, back to courage, right? And so the thing about your message about courage, which totally resonates with me, is that it's not just the courage to invite Vernā in to host a conversation about inclusion. It's about looking at every system and say, is there an inherent bias in the system? So with these 5,000 comp people, the whole structure, which by the way, was built mostly by compensation experts, which by the way are mostly women. I'm like, you created this mess. Look at the mirror. Who made this stuff up?
Yeah.
The bell curve and the distributions and the job levels and the titles and the, percent increase in the, compa ratio.
Right.
The stuff that nobody on God's earth besides us knows what means. Right. So, I love that part, Vernā. It's the courage to look at the whole thing. And so we talk a lot. One of our audiences we're hoping is like people who are early stage companies. How would you advise them to get it right from the get-go?
So first of all, I just want to ouch for the comp people because there are probably some comp people going, my feelings are hurt.
Yeah. Well, we're sorry, comp people.
Right? It's okay. We are not all the same, we know. But yeah. So, here's the thing I will say about new companies.
Yeah.
And Jessica, you may have some insight too, because you're often advising those companies. One is to just get out of denial. That's always my first suggestion.
Wow.
No matter how wonderful you are, no matter how caring you are, or how fair you think you are, you're not. And therefore, if you're going to build something that fosters inclusion and equity and diversity, you can't be by yourself. You have to invite in a diverse group of people to help you shape the thing. You know, I always talk about that story about going back to listen to these women who were the first class of Harvard women at the law school. It was like 1953. And when they got there were no bathrooms for them.
Uh-huh.
Now that's just a structural problem that a bunch of brilliant people might have actually thought of beforehand, except they already had a restroom. So it's like the things you miss are because your lived experience doesn't allow you to necessarily see them. So if you want to build something that's diverse, if you want to build something that's equitable and is thoughtful, you gotta have, if they're not like sitting right beside you, if they're not your partners, if you haven't, you know, because often, you know, you're starting something with your friend. Your friend is often like you, and maybe they're the same race, or maybe the same gender, or maybe the same, you know, educational background, whatever. There's a lot of sameness.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of sameness. Nothing wrong with that. But you should be aware that you're looking through the glass dimly, right? And so you want to invite other perspectives. In fact, even like, you know, it could be consumers, it could be constituents, it could be, you know, funders, whomever would actually add a different perspective. So that's one thing. Second thing is you got to make it your business to hire soon as much diversity as you can. And when I say diversity, I mean, there are lots of different dimensions of diversity, right? So you're not only focused on one thing, including now people are thinking about neurotypes and all sorts of ways of learning and thinking and all that. Those are important as well, because let me tell you, if you get too far out, if you wait too long to address this, it's just an uphill battle.
Yeah.
And it becomes the system.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you create the same system that's been built everywhere else.
Over and over again. You know?
Do you see that, Jess?
Oh, yeah.
Jessica is a venture capitalist now, and so she's working with literally early stage startups. So
I think early stage, late stage, Vernā, you're correct. It's I often see that there is a philosophical like understanding that we want this, we need it. However, it is, to your point, the denial and the courage, because these things aren't obvious and they're hard and they're complicated to talk about. And a lot of companies, to your point, you have these brilliant, courageous people that are starting a company and trying to do something to impact the world differently, right? And disrupt things. However, disrupting this is so foreign and they don't even know where to start. So then they just don't do it. Right.
Yes.
And so then it's the same company, you know, it becomes the same company that every company is. And so one of the things too that I wanted to talk a little bit about is I don't think it's really the size of the company or the stage of the company, because I see it at both places. I think they manifest differently because, you know, in a bigger company, you have probably more process and people. In a smaller company, you're just kind of creating all that stuff. So they're manifesting differently. However, the denial and the courage, those things are the same. Right. And so,
agreed.
You know, the other thing that I see is, so there's just a total sort of avoidance of it, right, in some of the smaller companies. And we're so small, we don't, you know, whatever, we're diverse enough. It's cool. We all like each other. And then at the bigger companies, you know, maybe there's more effort put around these things, because if you're not putting effort around these things, then, you know, folks aren't going to want to work there. However, the effort is often not impactful, right? And more to your point earlier, checking the box, right? It's not really doing the work. It's like, okay, hey, we had the diversity conversation, yay. And then, you know, let's have these conversations, I don't know, 5 times a year. Okay, great. We're going to do it 5 times a year. And, you know, and then you got some of the companies too that talk about it a lot and it's still not doing anything. And then you have employees that are just like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I just want to do work. Like, I want to do work. I don't want to talk about this complicated stuff that makes me uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
And so I see that happening. And again, it manifests differently at the stage of the company, but I think kind of similar from where they originate, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. What Jessica is saying is absolutely true, that it doesn't even matter what stage you're in. And I do know that there is a fun company. I wish I could remember their name, but they're looking at startups to help them recognize that the investment early on in the front will actually make them much more successful towards the end, or even in the middle, and fundraising and everything like that. And they are trying to make those connections, because here's what I think is happening. When you believe in something, you go after it. Like when you believe you're something, when you truly believe, you go after it. When you think it's a nice to have, everything else gets in front of it. And let's be realistic, right? If you're building a new company, it's like you're trying to get money. It's so fast paced. Everything matters. Everything is relational. And so there's some real pressures not to really put this forth, and it slows things down. It may make you, someone might tell you something about yourself that you wish isn't true. And here's the other thing that it does is it spotlights our own personal lives. Like our own social circles are so absent often of diversity that it requires so much work for us to actually do this. So you start to be very aware that, oh shoot, I don't really have a diverse network. And so then you call your one friend to see if they know somebody. Yeah, right. Who knows somebody who, whatever. So I do, but I also hear what Jessica's saying too, because you get to the big companies and they've tried a bunch of things, but it was all kind of superficial. And we still, and it pulls right back to that same point, which is like, you got to be embedded. You have to be in the systems. Oh, and you also have to be down for the long term. This is not short-term work. So I think when people do this work, they think we're going to do this for the beginning. We're going to focus on hiring, and then we're all going to be fine. And we hired 10 people, so that should be good.
Yeah.
But that's where the inclusion part comes in. That's where the equity part comes in. That's where the belonging and the compensation, everything.
You hire these 10 people and then they're in your company for a hot minute.
Yeah. So I knew this from all of my time in Silicon Valley. And so when I came to Netflix on the tech side, I was like, we're going to just hire a lot of women at the beginning. And if we hire a lot of women at the beginning, my experience was like, then we won't have to worry about it. It'll just be part of who we are. And it worked great.
Yes.
Anyway, we had lots and lots of women and lots of women in technology for a long, long time. I mean, I never worried about it. And then when we started having to hire from hardware companies, right? When we had to start hiring from deeply technical, like
machine learning
or clouds, then I was recruiting from the big companies that had never cared.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So now if I want to create a team that's going to do hardware interface with Motorola and Samsung and right, all of these big hardware companies, they're all men.
This is related to what's happening right now. And I'm really kind of, I don't use the word worry, but I know I'm aware, which is that with all of what is happening with the backlash against DEI sort of, and the loud sort of response to the Supreme Court decision around affirmative action, that when you look at pipelines, if there are universities that are going to run scared or drop or misunderstand how important it is to bring in talent from so many backgrounds to educate them, that means that the schools that we rely on to get talent from, it's going to dry up with regard to diversity. And so that will impact who we can hire as well. Yep. It's a similar thing, is that we hire from organizations and situations that were already monocultural, and expect somehow that we're going to create a diverse group. And that is when we talk about systemic or structural, this is the point, right? So we really have to work really hard to make sure we have pipeline programs all the way back to basically kindergarten, high school, whatever. Because if we don't, especially with this whole backlash, there are not going to be that talent. We're going to miss out on that talent.
Yeah.
And unless, and to me, the most racist thing you can think, or the most sexist thing you can think, is that the majority of talented people come from one group.
Oh God, I hear you.
And even though we don't say it out loud, what else is there to gather from how you're doing this, unless you think somehow you can miss a whole group of, somehow you can get rid of a whole group of people and not miss genius, you know? And so this is the thing that I'm really like paying attention to right now.
Oh God, but yes.
Yeah.
I was just explaining it to a friend I reconnected with after 1,000, brilliant person. She's like, well, help me understand what this whole diversity affirmative action shit is. It's like, don't you just hire the best people? Right. And I was like,
That's the whole point.
Ah! Yeah. So thank you. That I needed that.
Yeah. No. And Vernā, I'm going to go a little bit off topic, a little bit sort of on topic, but there's this big conversation around artificial intelligence. And I know you're not an engineer. However, everybody's like, okay, AI is going to be great for diversity. And then everybody's like, no, AI is going to be horrible for diversity. Like you can, and there's all these companies that are, trying to figure out this problem in a very disruptive, innovative way with like really good intentions. But what is your thought on this, knowing that you're not a technical person, but do you feel like this is going to be something that is more game changing, or you think it is harmful?
It's such a great question, because it's like any major technology, right? It's going to have its upsides, it's going to have its downsides. It's going to be supportive of diversity, and it's also going to be problematic for diversity. In fact, I mean, what the thing with AI, right, is that it's what you put in it is what you're going to get out of it, right? So we know that there is a lot of bias. And so therefore we know that will be spat back out. But we also know that AI pulls from so many places, which means that you are getting some diversity of thought and awareness and experience, et cetera. So there could be, and also the access, right? It's just like the internet, right? Has it made things worse for some things? Has it made, yes, right? Because the democratization of it really spoke more to diversity and more people getting access to the information, et cetera. But it also meant that, if you're not careful, you're just in a loop of your own thoughts anyway.
Yeah.
And so with AI, the quality of the question matters, So I think what we're talking about is like, this big thing is here to stay. It's extraordinary, and it needs, bumper cars, and it needs ethicists, and it needs checks and balances, and it needs all the things that any piece of technology needs in order for it to serve everyone in an equitable way. And we're just going to be at that for long.
And if we think of it holistically as a new system, like this is another thing that makes me crazy sometimes, and I'm trying to stay calm about it because it helps me. Let's learn about those things. Let's pay attention to that.
I mean, one of the things, for example, like I see just from my little tiny bit of use of it, is that you get surprised. Sometimes you get surprised by what it gives you.
Oh.
Yeah.
So anytime you're surprised, that means you're interrupting the way you think about the world. So that can be a real positive thing. Now, you could also say, tell me how to be the most exclusive, racist and sexist. You know what I'm saying? Right, you could also say, how do you build an incredibly equitable compensation system? And actually give people ideas that they hadn't thought of because we've gotten so stuck. And so I just see that, like any kind of technology, right? It could be weaponized. It could send us backwards. But I'm prayerful that we'll have people who care enough and who have seen enough of it go wrong that will build in some of the checks and balances to get us to a better existence.
Yeah. Just because of everything going on in the world right now, there's, elections happening everywhere. And, you're at work and these things are impacting you. Your company doesn't talk about it at all. Should they talk about it? Because it's super complicated. And Vernā, we had these conversations, many a time for years and years. Like, what's the right balance to strike between like taking a stance politically as an organization, talking about these things? There's also the ostracization of, people feeling differently about these views like that happen in the company. I remember when I told, I was at an offsite and I told these very senior people that my husband was a Republican. They almost fainted. And, and I was like, I still love him. He's a Republican, but I still love him. And they just, almost lost their shit. And, so anyways, not to belabor this, but it's complicated and it's hard. So what is your advice here? What do you do?
So I have a magic wand.
Oh, good.
Y'all, this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Having sat in the VP role at Netflix for 5 years when we had a number of really hard things going down, and we have this really hard time right now. I have a couple of things that I try to keep in mind. First, there is no right, so to speak, in the sense that I think you have to treat each thing as its own thing. Each crisis, each war, each issue, because there's so much context, right? And the hardest thing is that people nowadays have some people have no context, and then some people have different facts. So it's like,
well, that's the thing too. It's like the facts aren't even correct.
We're not even talking about the same reality. And so trying to sit down and have a conversation is so difficult, a discourse that is going to ultimately be useful. So I started off saying we should be able to discuss these things because they actually ultimately affect us, whether we know it or not. Like somehow, someone now is going to look at you differently because you have a husband who is Republican. You just happen to slip that out. And now all of a sudden you notice that people are looking at you askance or they're not wanting, right? So we pretend that it doesn't matter, but we've got all sorts of assumptions that we're making about people. We have all sorts of ways in which we're thinking about who they are, where they come from, what they must believe or whatever. And so that is actually impacting our relationships, who we snuggle up to, who we have confidence in, who we tell like the gossip to. So I do feel that there are conversations that do need to happen in the workplace, because quite frankly, the workplace is now kind of the only place where people are having conversations with people they don't exactly believe the same thing about, right? So how are we ever going to expand and understand and get more comfortable with difference? Because for many of us, the difference is in our workplace, and it's not in our town, and it's not in our worship center, and it's not in, our kids' school. So I do recognize how important it is, but in order for us to do it, we would have to have some agreements. And the agreements would have to be, we are all human and we all deserve respect, and we all deserve to be treated in a way that gives us dignity. And so that's hard if we actually think that we're better than other people because of something we believe or something that we've lived. And that's what I see. I see that people say that they want equality, but really there is a supremacy about my view, my background, my religion, my sense of the world. And so we're not really coming to each other with compassion. We're not really coming to each other with the willingness to be changed. We're not really coming to each other with mercy or grace. When we can and when we do, and sometimes it's by the moment, because I know I fall in and out of it, where I can like hold it for a bit for someone, even though I don't agree with them. And then there are other times where I'm like, I don't want to be bothered. So this time is a time for us to grow as humans if we accept it as such. It's also a time that is fraught with destruction and degradation and all sorts of ways to take us in the wrong direction. And I'm pointing towards harmony and unity and compassion. And I recognize just how difficult it is.
I love that.
Me too.
We do career confessions on this show, and we would love to invite you to do it with us.
I would love to.
Okay. So let's hear the question.
How much should I spend on EDI training? This person used EDI as their acronym. As a manager, I've come to realize that my team could benefit from some serious diversity training. I want to create a workplace where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. I'm on the lookout for recommendations or experiences with diversity training programs. How much should I be budgeting? Any insights or resources you can share? It would be much appreciated.
This is a perfect question for you, Vernā.
Yes. Which program should he buy and how much should he budget?
I know. The Vernā Myers company, of course.
Yeah, of course.
There's so many ways to go, and there are lots of great resources out there. So if you want to do group work, we did this at Netflix. We invited a company in to really work with our leaders as a way of then, hopefully those leaders being able to push down and actually behave and operate in a way that would create more inclusion for the team. So you might want to say, where do I start? As if you want to be budget conscious, like what's the best strategy for who gets trained and when and how much? Because you might decide that your leaders get much more and more in depth, and then your larger team might get like, a one-day conversation. Or you could do LinkedIn, which does a lot of individual learning. So both group and individual learning. Some companies do large group conversations and they have a speaker come in and that person does interactive work. The main thing I want to suggest is that you do your research. Because the wrong DEI training in person can set you back years. Okay. So really do your research, talk to other people who've got great great resources to suggest, but there are lots of things out there that you can use. And I have no idea budget wise, it really does depend, but you need to be able to spend some money because what you pay, you get what you pay for.
Yeah. And the only thing that I'll add that is actually budget friendly is the part where this person says, I want to create a workplace where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. So do it. I love it. Do it, right? Like if that's what you want, you are in full control of the environment you create for your team. And so create that environment. And then also maybe that, trickles out to other teams and other places in the organization because they see what you're doing. So you have the power to do this. And yes, you can buy things and you should. And obviously you have a budget for it, but have the courage to do it yourself.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you, Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.